On today's episode,
Over the past 3, 4 years, our kids doing the shootings are 12, 13 years old now. It's not uncommon for that young to be the ones doing the violence. And
right.
it's not uncommon for us to get 13, 14-year-olds in traffic stops that they're driving stolen cars with guns, doing drive-by shootings. They're getting younger and younger. They see a lot of it. They see the social media. They see their, not say elders, but the older teens, older kids. They see the money and the power and the flashy posts where they're posting the jewelry and the watches and the cash and the girls and these videos they're recording and posting, and they want that too, and they want that status and that power and the bragging rights of look at me and my guns and money, and it's just been spreading like wildfire.
Welcome back to the Well-Informed Podcast. I'm your host, Colton Easton, and joining us today is Dr. Chris Felton, one of our longtime trainers and friends at Safer Schools Together, but so much more than that. And we're going to get into a lot of that today. Obviously, you'd be able to share some of your stories and what got you to where you are today, and some of the important lessons and learning for folks to take home. So, Chris, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So for those, again, who may be unaware, Chris has been a trainer with us since 2021, but, having him in person is really important because the, location differential is always tough because, again, you based out of
Indiana
and us in Vancouver, British Columbia. It's a little bit hard to just say, hey,
right.
Hop on a plane and come over. So that's why we're recording again at Gangs and Guns. That's why we look a little bit different. That's why I look a lot more formal than usual. But for Chris, those who may not know kind of who you are and what do you do?
Sure. All right. I'm Chris Felton. I work in law enforcement. Been in law enforcement about 18 years total. I serve as a detective sergeant with the Gang and Violent Crimes Unit with my police department back in Indiana in the States. My full-time job there. I'm also one of our homicide team supervisors. I'm a public information officer, work as a background investigator. I'm a voice stress, truth examiner. Mm-hmm. I work, and I'm also in charge of our peer support critical incident stress management team, which is our mental health team for our officers internally. Do a couple other things on the departments. I teach college at 2 local universities in criminal justice and forensic psychology courses, and I recently got my PhD in criminal justice with a focus on law and public policy. And I've worked for SST for a few years.
Okay.
So just got a lot going on.
There is no time for rest in there. My gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and, there's a lot of busy things going on, and I think all of that is really fantastic. And usually I have notes in front of me that I try to refer on, but hey, we're just going off the top today. But there's a lot of really interesting aspects that I think you'd kind of be able to bring to this conversation. I think the first thing that would be really good to kind of dive into is the gang side of things. So, being that we're still at a gang conference, you've been able to see a little bit of the presentations revolving around the gang landscape, specifically in British Columbia. And some of those presentations, whether, from earlier this morning or just seeing from our presenters and our social media that we pull from that. And I'm curious to know what are the biggest kind of key differences you see when we're looking at gangs in here versus the side that you're dealing with.
It's different. The one this morning, she was talking about how they're more organized gangs, and they're larger with the UN and some of like the outlaw motorcycle groups. They have established hierarchies and more established groups where in the U.S., unless you're in Los Angeles or New York or Chicago, where you have your traditional big gangs like the Bloods or the Crips or Latin Kings, most cities other than those big cities don't have those traditional organized gangs anymore. We have those called hybrid gangs, where they're neighborhood based or they're school based, and they're more younger kids that get together, and whether they're in a neighborhood and they get together for the reasons of they need protection, they don't have the protection at home or the love and support at home, so they're seeking that out. And they'll take things they see from those national gangs or from the movies and kind of make it their own. But there's typically no hierarchy, no structure, no loyalty. In the national gangs, the big gangs, brother, dad, uncle, cousin was in this gang. And these local neighborhood hybrid gangs, not a whole lot of that. Or they may have been a different gang at some points. Right. And in our gangs, in most bigger, medium-sized cities in the U.S., they're younger. We have what's called like a bullseye method for the hybrid gangs, where you have maybe in a gang of 30 or 40, people, you might have 5 or 6 that are the ones that are doing the actual trigger pulling, doing the violence. Those are your hardcore gang members. That's like the red center. We focus on those primarily, and then the next layer is like your yellow layer, I guess. You might have 15, 20 who still claim the gang. They're the ones like driving the car during the drive-by, or doing the rap videos, making the disses, making the social media posts, but not actually pulling the triggers. And then the next layer is the ones that say, yeah, I'm with this gang, claiming it. They may be dealing some drugs or going to parties, but aren't actually doing much violence or anything. So we found if we can target that red center, 5, 6 shooters and get them locked up, that hybrid gang typically will dissolve.
Right.
And those outskirts will then kind of they'll go away until the next 4 or 5, 6 hardcore kids start doing something and everybody flocks to them.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the difference from here, where there's more organized structure and hierarchy.
I see. And I think there is some similarity to that here, because that kind of the bullseye approach, we look at that very similarly for those who are heavily entrenched, those who are still participating, and those who are kind of just on the outside a little bit, or those who are just like that general public who's just exposed to there. And obviously working a lot on the prevention side, it's kind of the opposite approach, where we target not the ones who are in, fully entrenched, because for a whole bunch of different types of, gang life programs and strategies, those who are so fully entrenched, it's, from all the work that you've done, those aren't usually the people you're going to flip, right? Right. So in that prevention aspect, we try to focus on the outside of those, while of course those middle groups who are still fully committed to that life are still going to conduct those shootings, pulling the triggers, as you say, and there needs to be that enforcement aspect there. And you said that they were kind of starting to get younger and younger. Have you noticed that kind of throughout your career?
Over the past 3-4 years, our kids doing the shootings are 12, 13 years old now. It's not uncommon for that young to be the ones doing the violence, and it's not uncommon for us to get 13, 14-year-olds in traffic stops that they're driving stolen cars with guns, doing drive-by shootings. And they're getting younger and younger, and access to guns is it's nonstop.
Yeah. What do you think a reason for that younger and younger gang involvement is?
They see a lot of it. They see the social media. They see their not say elders, but the older teens, older kids. They see the money and the power and the flashy posts where they're posting the jewelry and the watches and the cash and the girls and these videos they're recording and posting, and they want that too, and they want that status and that power and the bragging rights of, look at me and my guns and money, and it's just been spreading like wildfire. And social media is a big caveat to their be conducive conductor of that, I guess.
Yeah, it's a big need, I think, and like when you've got somebody, and for us at least, when we look at our youth who are involved in negative peer groups, youth gangs, one of the big things is when we compare kind of like gangs in British Columbia to those outside maybe the United States, right? Our youth usually aren't coming from those, kind of destitute neighborhoods, some of those traditional risk enhancers you would see from basically what what we would see in the movies in terms of like, living in some of those, again, those, impoverished neighborhoods, that typical lifestyle. Some of our youth come from, single family households. They have, 2 parents who are working, who are involved. So what we notice is that there's still a need that somehow is not being met. And I think for some of the youth that you deal with and some of the youth that's here, it's that sense of belonging, that sense of brotherhood, kinship, that I think, especially for young men, is such a huge push and pull to whatever takes them to that particular area, whether it is you have to do this first, or it's a sports team or something like that. Right. And obviously the work that we do primarily focused on the prevention aspect. Do you see a lot more of those popping up in the United States, especially where you are, because of the almost increase of youth who are, getting involved younger and younger, and some of the more prevalence, like you mentioned, of access to firearms?
See more of what
Those types of prevention efforts, I guess.
it depends on where you're at, on
Yeah.
what city or what county, and what the focus of that city or county's government and police department is. If they're more focused on strictly an enforcement side, or if they're focused on an intervention side.
Right.
So it varies on what city and state you're in, really, on how who's in charge, and if they want more prevention or intervention or some of both.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. And you talked about the access to firearms too. One of the big things, I know the big pushes that we see, or the big increases that we're noticing right now, is the 3D printed firearms.
Yeah.
So for those who may be hearing that for the first time and unsure whether it's the 3D printing or the CNC machine type, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
And what your exposure to that has been?
Yeah, you can order a 3D printer on the internet for a couple $100, and then
Yeah.
you can Google or search how to, instructions to 3D print a firearm. It looks like your printer, maybe 2 foot high and 2 feet wide, and you load the instructions on whatever you want it to make, and then in a couple of hours, it literally 3D prints out of this plastic, basically,
Yeah.
or polymer, whatever you tell it to. So you can make
Right.
anything from a baby toy to a fully functioning firearm.
And I actually have a couple like 3D printed like toys that I bought at a flea market, basically. And they're
Yeah.
cool, right? But that's a niche hobby. I'm glad I haven't fallen down the rabbit hole in, because there's so many for me, from what I see, is so many interesting use cases for that. But my mind doesn't go to, I could make a firearm with this. So when we think about like the toys or the, how that gets made, what does that look like for a firearm?
You can tell when it, like the better made ones, they feel pretty solid, but you can still see like the lines, how the 3D printer is like, this is how it prints. So you can tell if something is 3D printed or not. They're also 3D printing the machine gun conversion devices that convert a semi-automatic handgun to a fully automatic handgun. The good news, I guess, is most of the ones that our youth are 3D printing, they're only good for 1 or 2 uses, and then they don't work anymore.
Right.
But that's one use is all it takes to kill somebody, unfortunately.
Of course.
The ones that they can order on the dark web or online from overseas, those ones work a lot better, I guess. But
Yeah.
we're seeing them 3D printed, and initially we were seeing them 3D printing firearms and these machine gun conversion devices in the schools, in libraries, because nobody really knew what it was, what they were doing.
Right.
So we've had to do a lot of education with teachers and libraries and shop teachers. Hey, if you see them 3D printing this device or guns or frames or lowers for, rifles, just knock it off.
Because what I think a lot of folks who maybe outside the firearm world may not know is that the specific part that's being 3D printed, especially if it is for maybe a fully automatic, even for assault style rifle, the lower receiver looks nothing like a firearm. You would see that and think it would be some sort of like car part
Sure,
or machine,
right. If you didn't know,
if
yeah.
you didn't know. And so I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, we're talking to teachers, talking to
Yeah.
librarians about that, because that's usually where you can go to rent 3D printers, because that even in our local libraries, there's 3D printers galore for students to be able to use and see, and how they can create those types of things. So if you're not aware, right, and those again, especially the lower receivers themselves, correct me if I'm wrong, in the United States, those are what is I guess is regulated, or has to have a serial number.
So for the privately made firearms, the most recent ruling, you can 3D print or make your own firearm, and it doesn't need a serial number, but you can't sell it. I can't give it to you. Otherwise, it has to be serialized for me to sell it or transfer to somebody.
I see.
Otherwise, I can make it all day long and carry it around and go to the range with it. Those are your ghost guns that don't have serial numbers. So that's not illegal, but I can't transfer it to you or sell it to you without it being serialized. I have to serialize it somehow.
I see, because the rest of the firearm parts you can essentially just purchase online without any.
So if people are ordering, like, they're called poly 80s or 80% polymer. So they ship you the main components. You got to drill some holes and put the trigger assembly in there and the firing pin, and it works. It'll function, but it won't have a serial number on it when it comes, because it's not a firearm. When you're buying it, it's just some parts you got to finish drilling and milling. And so those are your ghost guns.
Gotcha.
They're not serialized,
Yeah.
but they're not illegal to possess or anything.
Gotcha. This is not an instructional video how-to, by the way.
Right.
just so we're clear. But yeah, there's lots of other recent, firearm modifications that we've seen, and I'm sure you've seen the ability to change a semi-automatic firearm into a fully automatic with just a simple, small little metal sliver.
Right.
And those are called switches, or
Right.
buttons, or whatever. But those can also be 3D printed. Those
Yep.
can be milled. And I mean, as a manufacturer of this, I'm curious. When did these start popping up, and why did they not start popping up earlier? I
Sure.
guess because the mechanism is so simple. Why have we not seen them earlier? I guess that's my question.
The U.S. saw thousands and thousands of those little machine gun switches, machine conversion devices or switches, come over in like 2019 from China, and they initially were marketing them for airsoft guns, and so it wasn't really flagged anywhere.
Right.
But per federal law and most state laws, they're considered a machine gun all on their own. They're illegal to possess. Just that tiny little switch
Yeah.
is all on its own as a machine gun. Well, there's thousands and thousands came over, I think 2019-ish. Once everybody in the ATF realized, oh my gosh, that they're taking these to real guns, and we have a whole bunch of machine guns out here now, started tracking them down, but they've been out there. Other companies have been marketing them and selling them, marketing them as like belt keepers or like doorknob deckers,
Oh my
all
gosh.
kinds of weird things.
To kind of skirt under
Just to
that.
kind of skirt, not to
Right.
fly under the radar.
Right.
And then when you got all into the 3D printing, now there's just 3D printed ones all over the place.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense with the rise of accessibility to 3D printing. So does the potentials of knowing what a switch or a button is, and the accessibility to be able to print one.
Right.
Yeah.
So like I said earlier, the good news, I guess, is that a 3D printed switch, it's only going to function a couple of times, and then it won't work anymore. But
Yeah.
it only
But
takes once to
Exactly.
fire off 1,000 rounds, and
Exactly.
bad things can happen.
And this is just one element of the thing that you're focusing on, right? You've got so many other broad, specialties that you focus on. And I think one of the ones that's really important is the mental health side of things. So you want to talk a little bit about that, and
Sure.
what got you along that journey, and
Yeah.
what that means.
When I was doing my master's degree in 2012, I was researching just PTSD in law enforcement because I was in the military also a long time ago. And the military does such a great job when you get home from deployment on demobilizations and just mental health treatment. But when I was doing my master's, 12, 13 years ago now, in mental health in law enforcement and just first responders was very taboo back then. It wasn't really discussed. It wasn't really researched. It was kind of you don't talk about that. The stigmas were there that you're supposed to be Superman and not have feelings, and that if you have emotions, you shouldn't be here. You should just quit and go somewhere else.
Right.
And we know how terrible that is, how that's not true at all, and how we see terrible things on a almost daily basis, and that takes a toll. And if you don't deal with it properly, that can cause you serious problems down the road.
Yeah.
We take care of our broken arms. We need to take care of our minds the same way. There's no harm or anything, no foul in taking care of your mental health, just like you take care of your physical health.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I began researching that a long time ago and realized, hey, there's a gap that needs filled. So I started to create for my master's a hypothetical mental health team for the police department. And then when I graduated, I was able to implement that in my police department, which was pretty cool.
Amazing.
And I've just seen over the past, 15 years now, mental health has just exploded in first responders, and it's just so much more normalized and accepted, and just it's come light years since then on what departments are doing for their first responders and how it's just more accepted nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is it really is fantastic to see, because, you get somebody to do a ride along or even just a day in the life, and those are things that just, you're dealing with people on their worst day of their life every day, basically,
Right.
and you have to continue to go and see those things. And so what does some of the, training look like, or how, in terms of trying to switch that stigma and get
Sure.
officers, first responders, to be able to actually open up and talk about some of those things, because as you mentioned, that in previous years, it's been something that's been just squished down so much.
We try to normalize it right off the bat for them. So in the academy, a lot of places will do critical incident training, and it's just saying, here's what a critical incident is. And basically, a critical incident is anything that you go to that is you experience that is outside the realm of normal human experience, that has the potential to cause unusual reactions in you, either at the scene or later. When you think about it, any incident outside the realm of normal human experience, that's like everything first responders do. It's not normal to see dead babies or people with their heads shot off or that sort of thing, and we do that all the time.
Right.
So they had to modify that definition for first responders a little bit. So it's kind of anything outside of our usual that causes us to have some unusual reactions or overwhelm our normal coping mechanisms, that sort of thing. And just telling people, look, when you go to these incidents, make sure you have healthy coping mechanisms in place. If you stick to your norms, giving them those healthy just tools to deal with it, and explaining, don't go home and just drink yourself to death. That's bad. Here's some normal, or it's not normal, here's some healthy ways to deal with the stress. And having officers who have been on for a while and who have credibility coming in and saying, hey, I've either gone down the wrong path and I luckily got some help and survived, or I got help right off the bat and I was okay. Just showing people that they made it and they weren't like fired or picked on, or they still got promoted, they still got on the SWAT team. Just showing them it's okay to talk about it has been really cool.
Yeah.
The younger generation of officers right off the bat is more receptive to mental health, which is cool. When we started teaching our officers, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was still kind of taboo. But now as the new officers are getting hired, they're just more open to it right off the bat, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, that makes sense, absolutely, because I think that has been such a huge driving conversation, especially in kind of the social media, internet, and digital world for the past few years. And again, some of those younger officers being some of those digital generations, essentially, that is something that has stuck for quite some time. So when we talk about healthy coping mechanisms, what are some of those things that are really important for those who are seeing some of those very traumatic things, whether again it's law enforcement or even those who are in some of the healthcare facilities, right? Some of the nurses, anybody who is seeing things outside the norm. What are some of those healthy coping mechanisms?
Talking to people, talking to friends, or talking to anybody that you trust, and just getting things off your chest, not bottling up. The worst thing we can do is just tuck things in that backpack and keep them there. And cops and healthcare, we're really good at dissociating when we see trauma and removing ourselves and just tucking it away. But just having that outlet of being able to vent and get it off our chest is very important. And not isolating yourself. Exercise is important. Having good eating habits is important. Self-care. Not sticking to your routines. We tell people after a traumatic incident, one of the things that affects us in first responders is we're control freaks, because we have to be in control. When we go to a scene, if we're not in control, people can die. We have to be in control. So we show up, we go to the call of the baby not breathing, let's say. I go to the call, I do CPR, baby lives, that's how it's supposed to be. So when I go to the call, baby not breathing, and I do CPR and the baby dies, that's not normal. It's like, wait a minute, what do you mean the baby died? Like, that's not how this works. Like, I'm the hero, right? It's like, it really screw with us when things don't work how they should. So we tell them, go home after that call and regain the sense of control. Make a decision what you want to eat for dinner. Make a decision what movie you want to watch. Like, regain some normalcy in your life, because that control thing can really kind of screw with our brains a little bit.
Yeah, I can imagine that rewiring, or just that internal that shift of like, that's not how this was supposed to go, can really just kind of sit and stew, and you kind of forget to do those things that are supposed to be part of that routine.
And it makes it worse if you have kids and you go to a child death call or whatever else you have going on in your life. Those stressors can aggravate something, whatever you're dealing with.
Or even things that maybe potentially you didn't even realize that you go to a situation or a call and something you have to do, you have to act, you have to stop the threat, and realizing that brings up so much more than maybe you just weren't prepared for, right?
And so part of the normalizing is telling people, hey, after that traumatic incident, when you go home, you might not be able to sleep, you might have a stomach ache, you might have nightmares, you might have all these reactions, and these are all normal reactions to an abnormal event. Like, your body is just doing what your body's going to do. Let it do its thing. You're not broken. You're not weird. You're not meant to be here. These are normal reactions to an abnormal event. So, because a lot of times people have said they'd go home and have nightmares, can't sleep, they don't want to eat, and they would think they're weird, they're broken. And people have gone on to develop full-fledged PTSD because they didn't want to tell anybody.
Yeah.
They thought they were broken, and they've said, I've talked to people who've said, if someone would have told me that that was normal, that I was like not weird or broken, I probably would have been comfortable asking for help or just known that I was okay, and not went on to develop full-fledged PTSD and ruin my life basically.
Yeah, because you think that those types of feelings that way, like, oh, everybody else is okay, so that means there has to be something wrong with me.
Right, so telling them no, not at all. It's normal to have these things.
Yeah.
It's okay. Or you might not have anything also. That's normal as well. We all react differently. We all perceive incidents differently.
Right.
And we tell them, hey, about 2 weeks is a normal time frame for those reactions. If it goes on longer than that, then let somebody know. Then let your peer support team or a chaplain or a mental health person know. But 2 weeks is about the time frame for those reactions.
Interesting.
Just trying to say it's okay. There's some like cliches. It's okay to not be okay, just not okay to stay that way.
Right.
Is one of them.
Yeah.
And then it's just normal reactions to an abnormal event.
Yeah.
That's what we're really trying to stress.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I think part of that more openness has been the earlier conversations of recognizing that, because I think for me personally, with the job that we're in and that what I've been able to learn from and expose myself to, I can recognize some of those things within myself and know that, oh, I know what I am experiencing is potentially, XYZ. And I think once it's demystified, right? Once I learn how something works or what is happening, then it demystifies it for me. So then when there is that mystery of like, why am I feeling this way? Why is this going on? Then that I can absolutely see that begin to fester and affect somebody.
Yeah. Another catchy saying is, if you can name it, you can tame it. So when you don't know what's happening, it freaks you out. It's scary. But when you figure out what's happening or you demystify it, okay, now I know how to process it or how to deal with it or what to do about it. But another kind of cool saying that I've learned along the way.
No, absolutely. No, and I'm sure it's helped, and the training that you do and the officers that you're able to talk to from that. How does some of that, I guess, training work?
We do. So all of our peer support members go through. It's a 3-day training right off the bat, and it's assisting individuals in crisis and then group crisis intervention through the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. And a lot of it's focused on like active listening skills and focused on like stress reactions and normal reactions and critical incident stress, to be able to tell officers what kind of we just talked about to normalize things, but also what to watch out for and look for in people that they're having conversations with. That they may need to say, hey, I think it's been too long. Why don't we go talk to this professional, or kind of get you hooked up with this person?
Yeah.
Because we're cops. We're not professional mental health.
Yeah.
So part of the big thing with peer support teams is that most first responders right off the bat don't want to go straight and talk to a psychologist, because they might be afraid they're going to get, have a fit for duty eval and lose their job, or the psychologist just doesn't understand. They've never been in a police car. Where if you have a fellow officer who's been there, most people are more receptive to talk to that person right off the bat. So that's the power of peers, is having someone who's been there before saying, hey, I'll call somebody after they've gone to whatever, say, hey, I heard you went to a dead baby call last night. Like, it sucks. I get it. Sorry, I've been there before. How you doing? Want to check on you, but I know what you're going through, and it really has that bond right off the bat.
Yeah.
So just explaining, trying to help. We train our team members how to approach somebody after an incident and convey that understanding and empathy, and then how to listen for responses that may indicate they're not doing well. They do need advanced level of care, if you will, or how to whatever they need to do, basically.
Yeah, that's helpful, because I think, to your point, having those who have lived that experience be able to be a part of that training or teaching, or just say, hey, look, these are the things that I experience. It sounds very similar to you. Here's, what I'm noticing. And even just those things to flip that switch of, oh, like, this isn't my own battle that I'm fighting.
Right. I've called people before and I've said, hey, how are you doing? They're like, oh, I'm fine. I'm good to go. Okay, well, just like, I've did that once when I went home, man. I had this, and this, and I couldn't sleep, and I cried myself to sleep. And they're like, oh, actually, okay, I'm glad you said that because I did the same thing. And it
Yeah.
gets them to break the barrier down
Yeah.
also. So that's that peer thing and help forms connections, which is good.
Yeah, no, and that's huge. So I'm really glad that that's something that's been put forward
Yeah.
by you in terms of your masters and getting through all that. So, what got you to start teaching at colleges and universities?
I love sharing knowledge. And I
Yeah.
love helping other people better themselves and achieve their dreams, and just wanted to just share what I've learned in my career and life with the young kids. And I love seeing these young students come in as bright-eyed freshmen wanting to save the world and helping guide them to whatever they want to do in their pathway in life and give them the tools they need to succeed and
Yeah.
help kind of guide them along. And I really enjoy that.
Nice.
And I love being able to give them the real world experiences and examples and stuff just to prepare them.
I'm sure that's something that helps them latch on to that too. So
Yeah.
so what are the courses again?
Well, I teach solve right now. I'm currently teaching crisis intervention and law enforcement, which is the mental health
Yeah.
based one, American government one, capstone. So their final capstone document. I think next session I have victimology, intro to criminal justice, and I have a
Nice.
criminal investigation next semester. I teach a whole bunch. I mean, wide.
Oh my gosh.
That's a whole wide range.
And then you
Every session is different.
Yeah, and you do our trainings too. Oh, man, that's great. Do you do the sessions in person or are they remote? Or your trainings? Yeah.
Both. One school I just do online. The other school I do online and in person.
Nice. Right on.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, there's lots of really great kind of topics and conversations. I know last year at Gangs of Guns you did speak about that mental health for first responders situation, or the meat of it there, and I'm glad you're able to share that. And the session for this upcoming symposium is a little bit different. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So this one is on procedural justice and police legitimacy, and how we can use procedural justice to really help solve violent crime and build relationships to get informants to help us figure out who's doing the violence, where they're at, who's doing the murders, where they're at, and how to increase clearance rates for homicides, how to find out where all the gang members are that need to be that red center that need to be dealt with, how to use the procedural justice mindset, how to equip your officers with that to build those relationships. Because procedural justice, it's really common sense things. It's treating people with respect and fairness, and treating them with making your decisions neutral, looking at a situation as an officer, and making your decisions based on just the facts of what's happening, not based on anything else, who they are, what they look like, anything like that. Treating them, making them feel like they're being treated the same that anybody else would be treated in that situation, that they understand that you're doing things just because of what's happening, not because of who they are or anything, and that it's a trustworthy process. This is just kind of high level. And then big one is giving them a voice. So letting them vent to you if they need to vent, or explain things to you, but also explaining things to them, what's happening. Like, here's why we yelled at you, here's why we pulled our guns on you. Just taking an extra minute to explain things.
Yeah.
And when you do all these different things properly, it really goes a long way to building relationships and to increasing their trust and respect in law enforcement.
Yeah.
And the research has shown that when officers properly employ procedural justice, people have so much more respect and cooperation at the time, and it persists later on down the road. Regardless of if they got a ticket or got arrested or got a warning, people will judge their experience more on how they were treated than what actually happened.
Right.
And so those relationships then, when you do it properly, you can really start to build informants and everything.
Yeah.
And the big thing is the people, in my world, the gang world, and homicide world, the people that make it easy to treat with procedural justice are the ones that are nice to us already. They're the ones that don't call us names, don't fight, don't run. But they're not the ones that typically have the information on where the murder suspect is at or where the gang members are at.
Right.
They're the good people, typically. The people that typically have the information that we want, where the murder suspect's hiding at and all the other things.
They probably don't want to
Those
talk to
people
you.
are the ones that typically don't want to talk to us right off the bat, that do run and fight and make it harder. but that's where it matters most to do what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
To implement procedural justice. So the officers that are so successful at getting informants and getting the information are the ones that are able to have that emotional intelligence in those situations to kind of, yeah, this guy just ran and fought and called me names, but they're still a person, and recognizing, hey, yeah, this person may be a gang member, but they're still a person.
Yeah.
And a lot of these gang members, they're in this life because they didn't have a chance sometimes.
Right.
And if I just talk to them like a person and treat them right and respectfully, I might be able to build a bond and help this person, but also get some information to do my job better, to stop some of the other violence.
Yeah.
And my city has really hammered procedural justice and some of the programs. And since 2019, we changed our homicide investigation process. Did a lot with that. But one of the components also was we were hammering the procedural justice aspect and the community relations aspect. And our homicide clearance rate has been over 85% for the past 5 years, and that's just unheard of in
Yeah.
a city as our size. The national average in the U.S. is like 55%. We've been like over 85% for several years now.
Wow.
And there's several reasons why, but one of those main reasons is the relationships we've built based on procedural justice. So I talk how that's one component to really help solve crime.
That's really interesting. So one of my close friends is local law enforcement, and she likes taking the calls that are domestics. And one of the things she's really started to do is take statements from sexual assault disclosures. So she'll typically deal with, in this case, women who are finally having the courage to say something 20 years later.
Okay.
So one of the things she's learned, she was telling me about this, is that previously when somebody would bring this information up, once that is made, they have to make an arrest in some of these cases.
Okay.
So once that statement is heard, she'll go out and do the arrest, and then the person who discloses and has made the call has started to spiral because they didn't know that I didn't want to get them in trouble, or I didn't want to do that. So she's kind of learned from that to say,
Okay.
Thank you obviously for coming and telling, but with that, once you say and go through this is what I'm going to do, and that kind of helps get them prepared for
Yeah.
whatever comes next and go through that. So that information sharing was a huge
100%.
piece of that.
Yeah. And there's been cases where, the one that really stuck out when I went through the training initially was officers were doing a felony stop, which were a high-risk traffic stop, where somebody in the car, let's say, has a murder warrant. So you don't just walk up to the car and say, "Hi, sir, can you come out?" Because it's dangerous, right?
Yeah.
So a high-risk stop is you have your guns out and you have them get out and walk back with their hands up and everything. And there was some guy was walking down the sidewalk, and he wanted to ask the officers something. And the officers were in the middle of the high-risk stop, and they cussed at this guy, get the F back, get out of
Yeah.
here, because they had to focus on this guy, not
Right.
that. And so upset this person over here. Well, after this stop was over with, most cops will just get in their car and just go on their day. Well, that officer looked at the guy over here and said, "Hey, man, come here for a second," and said, "Hey, I didn't mean to cuss at you. I'm sorry. Here's why we cussed at you. We were doing with this." So just took time to explain things, and then said, "Hey, what can I help you with?" And then went on his day. I mean, it took like 30 seconds to do that. A day or two later, there was an officer involved shooting, and that bystander over here witnessed it, and actually called the police department and said, "Hey, I witnessed the shooting, and I want to come forward and tell you what I saw." The cop was in the right, and when they asked him, like, "Why are you coming forward?" He said, "Well, the cop the other day was nice to me, and it really made a difference to me,
Yeah.
so I wanted to pay it back to you guys."
Interesting.
And just little things like that show
Yeah.
just taking an extra 30 seconds to explain to somebody why you yell at them, it can really go a long way.
Yeah.
And there's been so many, and I've witnessed that sort of thing so many times now with my detectives. When you do this properly, when it matters, a lot of times,
Yeah.
you can really build those relationships to get the information that we want to get for homicides and violent crime and gangs and everything.
I could imagine for some of those officers who have been in it for a long time and kind of develop those mentalities of I know the type, they're not going to say anything, they're not going to do this. I can imagine just some of those kind of jaded officers in some cases. And so how would you go about, does that session or does that procedural justice, how does that include some of those?
The actual training is an 8-hour training day, and it actually focuses on cynicism and talks about how we do get cynical because we deal with the worst of society day in and day out. But you got to remember, we only deal with 2% of society.
Yeah.
That's, to us, that's 100%, but it's not. It's only 2% of society. And if you let yourself focus on that, then you're going to get jaded and cynical. But if you focus on all the positive things, and one of the cool things that my department did different with the actual procedural justice training, Chicago Police Department started the procedural justice training, and they did a phenomenal job. And they realized it had to be cops teaching cops, because no cop wants to listen to some academic come talk to them.
Yeah.
So they did a great job. Some California departments took it and kind of modified it a bit. But my department, when we started doing it, we have cops teaching it, but we also brought in community members into the training to attend also.
Nice.
And so we have like round tables, about 5, 6 officers, 4 or 5 community members at these round tables to show the community what we're teaching the officers, but also to have them there and have a voice present in this training. And there's different like scenarios and discussion questions. And you'll give us a discussion question on the table, and it might be a high-risk traffic stop. And you'll have the community members tell the officers what they fear and what they feel during a traffic stop, and the officers tell the community members what they fear and what they feel like during a traffic stop. And those conversations are amazing to see what happens there, and it really changes the perspectives of some of the officers. And some of the veteran officers will leave those training days, those sessions, and they'll say, hey, I forgot that the citizens, they're good, normal people. I forgot they want the same things we do, and I forgot how it feels good to actually connect with them and build relationships. So it's really cool to see how that training works. And the citizens have left saying, you know what, these cops aren't a bunch of racist a-holes. They're actually pretty cool people.
Right.
So it really breaks down the barriers.
Yeah, and I think for me, because I have friends on social media, peers, friends who are very, very different sides leaning of the fence, right? I've got some who are very far opposed, all ACAB, all defund, but I know that's not the reality because I see that, right?
Yeah.
And I know what their reality is because of what they've been exposed to, and that's not to mitigate or minimize any of their experiences that they've had, because there is going to be negative experiences that community partners and community are going to have with law enforcement. But I think the more we can have that of community understanding, where we get people from different walks of life in a room to come together to share those things. And I'm fortunate enough that I notice that, right? Because I do see the parts of the internet and parts of the world who are just completely so anti-police and anti-this and anti-that. And, I can understand where those come from their past experiences. But then all the work that we do, that you and I do, I see everybody in this for the right reasons. Everybody who wants to be here for the same purpose, the same cause, has that drive to make our community safer. And I also see the drawback of what happens when we do remove some of that some of that potential, whether it's school resource officers or just police from just different areas. And it's the crime's not going to stop. And people have many different definitions of what that crime essentially is, but again, it's really interesting. But I really like that ability to have community partners and come together, because at the end of the day, what we talk about with you and with everybody else, it seems that what everything boils down to is just building trusting relationships. Right?
That's what it's all about, is relationships. Absolutely.
So if we were to give kind of a final remark to folks who are listening, closing thoughts, statement for, those, whether they're parents, they're educators, they're law enforcement, in, tuning in wherever they are, what would be some of those thoughts you want them to know?
I don't know. If you're law enforcement, take care of yourself. If you're anybody, first responders, if you're in the schools, if you're doing, what you guys do here full time, just take care of yourselves and your mental health. And like I think Michelle Gay said this morning, you got to take care of yourselves first. If we don't take care of ourselves, then we can't take care of others. So we really have to take care of your mental health and prioritize that in order to be the best version of ourselves to serve everybody else. That's very important.
Yeah. One final question, because you are so busy. What do you do to take care of yourself? What are your things? What are your things you like to do? Because I know every time Steven goes and meets up with you, he's like, we got to go hiking. We go hiking.
Yeah. I love being outside, outdoors in nature. I love going hiking. I love going to the gym. Our gym has different classes that I love going to do there. I play sand volleyball and volleyball in the wintertime.
Volleyball.
Volleyball is indoor volleyball in a racquetball court.
Whoa, cool.
So it's got a net, but it's volleyball in a racquetball court.
Yeah. I don't think I've seen that before.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. I
Yeah.
do sand volleyball, volleyball, and then summertime I do softball all season long.
Nice.
And then just go to the gym and then hiking and I'm a cigar connoisseur also.
The little things, right?
Little
Absolutely. Yeah, no. Hey, lots of great hiking here in Vancouver.
I know.
Especially.
I need to come back more often.
Yeah, you do. You gotta come back
Yeah.
more. Awesome. Well, Chris, thanks so much for being part of the
Thanks for
conversation,
having me.
man. And yeah, I appreciate you.